welcome to the Strategic Alignment Podcast. I'm your host, not Jamie Pottinger this evening, Shauna K. Pottinger. And it's a delight to invite you and welcome you to this episode of the Strategic Alignment Podcast. We continue to inspire growth as we sustain excellence here at Pottingers and Associates Consulting. And this evening will be absolutely no different. I am so excited about this evening's program, and I just want to pause in this moment to celebrate and welcome all the women who are on here on this live podcast this evening. And we also want to wish a very special happy Women's History Month to all our women who are movers and shakers across this world. You are amazing, you are valuable, and we're very proud of the work that we have done in driving the message about diversity. And that's a perfect segue into our program for this evening, because this evening we're talking about how we can gain the strategic advantage through diversity. Diversity and that subject matter touches a lot of I would say sensitive areas in some discussions, because people really don't understand and appreciate the value that diversity brings. And our guest this evening, Dr. Jeanette Winters, will be helping us to unpack the subject matter. And so I'm going to bring her in at this time. Dr. Jeanette Winters, thank you so much for joining us this evening on our Strategic Alignment Podcast. Welcome. How are you doing, Jeanette? It's been a minute.
It has been a crazy minute, hasn't it? It's so good to see you, Shauna K. And you look lovely as always.
Thank you so much. Jeanette, I remember when we met and you made a lasting impression in my mind just because of your openness and your willingness to learn more about me, about my family. And I really felt valued from our conversations. And I'm very happy that this is the subject matter that we're going to be delving into this evening. Just for the benefit of those who are watching, I'd love to hear you share with our viewing audience some more about you and what you do at this time.
Well, I'm delighted to be with you and with all of your guests, with all of your viewers tonight. My name is Jeanette Winters. I am a practitioner, academician in the field of people. I have been a lifelong business person who specializes in people. And that's really the bend that I bring to the subject we're going to talk about tonight, which is diversity and what it means in the business world. I think it's so important. I have an earned doctorate from the University of Southern California. Go Trojans. An inherent bias on my part, right? And so I also offer that I am a first-generation college student in my family and am the child of immigrant families from different parts of the world. And so my experience, while different from anyone that comes and listens to us tonight, comes with those inherent overlays. And that's why I share that information with all of you. I hope everyone will join me on LinkedIn. It's Jeanette K. Winters, and I am one of the managing partners with Parish Partners. We're a consulting and management practice, global in nature, and built around our education, knowledge, and experience. Just so good to be with you tonight.
Jeanette, it's great to have you. As we celebrate Women's History Month, we cannot have this conversation without celebrating and underscoring the important role that women have played in the world of business. And you yourself have made significant impacts and strides in terms of being an agent of change within the realm of business. And, both of us, we have a shared value system around the importance of leadership by valuing. And one way to show significant value is through diversity. But I want, for the benefit of those who are on this platform, for you to give us some insight into what a diverse team looks like. I'd love to hear what your perspective is on that.
You know, you often hear the acronym these days, DE and I, standing for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, diversity is really translated into including differences into how we make decisions, product design, even into education, based on who we are, what we may believe, and what we bring to the world. Equity is very simply equal access to opportunities. And that's something that you and I believe fervently is our obligation and our intent. And then inclusion is respecting and appreciating the differences that make us us, right? So there are two aspects of diversity that I'd have our audience members remember. One is inherent, the things we're born with. We're born from the parents who gave us life. We are gender assigned. We have a race, an ethnicity. We're born into a socioeconomic status. Then there is acquired, our education. It may be our sexual orientation. It may be a rank or our experience. But those are two important aspects and very distinct within the issue of diversity.
Excellent. So as you're breaking that down, and I appreciate your getting into the DEI and that acronym as it relates to equity. You know, Jeanette, I just came across a powerful video with one author that was basically making the case for equity being the real source or the foundation of the conversation as it relates to diversity. And I would love to hear your take on that, because her perspective is somewhat interesting. Basically, what she says is that the real issue behind pushing diversity in the workplace is that diversity seems to capitalize and makes much more visible the differences among people. And because of our inherent biases and our need for being around people who look and feel like us, it's somewhat easier to drive change by saying to people, hey, can we be agreed on this one thing, that equity is important? So let's dispel with the term diversity and let's use equity instead, because equity seems to hone in more on what are the factors that should center humanity around a common good, to say you need to be fair to everybody. You know, people who come to the job and they are there to get a position, it's equitable for you to say, I'll hire you based on your skill sets and no other factor should apply. I'd love to hear your take on that, because I think it was a rather interesting perspective.
You know, I can appreciate why the good Paloma Medina stressed the importance of equity, because that's really the outcome, right? That's what we want for everyone as a result of diversity. Equity, equal access to opportunities. We want no one denied, and we want no one to have any additional barriers or challenges based on any of their characteristics. Diversity is what makes us who we are, and we should be embraced for that. And equality and equity, two distinctions, but they are, in fact, what I think we all need to aspire to.
Excellent. Thank you so much for making that point. You know, one of the things that I very excited about when it comes on to this discussion, especially as it relates to diversity, is that these podcasts are created for the specific purpose of equipping individuals who are working in leadership capacities and have the capability and the power to impact change. One statistic that I came across is that whereas for the population, 30% of the population within the United States of America go to church on a weekly basis, churches are not really diverse these days. We tend to worship with people who look and feel like us. And so even though the basic tenets and principles around Christianity embrace a more diverse type of being, really we can't look to the churches to make that change. We've seen the government try to make that change, and they've not necessarily done a good job of it. One of the areas that we can make a significant change is in the workplace. But I would like for you to tell us, what are some of the benefits that leaders should look to, or they can anticipate if they should move towards embracing a more diverse workspace within the organization?
We could spend the entire hour on talking about the benefits of diversity because they are social, they are competitive, they mean money. This is a bottom line issue. And as a business person, that's really what I believe that most business people look for. And so for me, from a societal or values perspective, there's no other way to live. And so I don't think diversity is an option. I was raised to believe it is an obligation. And
Wow.
not only an obligation, but one of the finer aspects of life, because everyone brings such unique attributes. But let's talk a little bit about the competitive and the financial implications of diversity, because they are massive. But first, one of the things we have to realize here in the United States, and for our guests that may be viewing or listening outside of the country, I apologize that the data that I'm about to share is U.S. based. But as we look at who we are as a nation, Millennial and Gen Z, as two generations, are the most diverse in history. 56% of the 87 million millennials are white, whereas 72% of baby boomers, those that came before the millennials and Gen Z, were white. So you can see we are becoming a multicultural, much more. We're just becoming that.
Yes.
Now, let's look at what that means. 67% of job seekers say that they look at how a company treats diversity because they want to be in a more diverse environment. So if you want the best people, become a diverse environment. 45% of American workers have indicated that they have either experienced discrimination or harassment in the past year. They are very serious and legal claims, and they need to be abandoned, abolished, and addressed. And as we become more diverse, those statistics will, in fact, decline. Majority of women report, and you and I know this as women from two distinctly different perspectives, that we feel excluded from decision making, and many of our colleagues do not feel comfortable expressing their opinions and don't feel as if they can succeed. Let's take a look at the data during the pandemic. For every job lost by a man, a woman, 3 women have lost their job.
Yes, I saw that. That was staggering.
Absolutely. It is staggering and it is unacceptable. Now, HBR, Harvard Business Review, did a study, and 78% responded, said that they observed a lack of leadership, in diverse leadership in their company. And as of where we sit right now, only 41 out of 500 companies are led by women. The numbers led by people of color are even less. That is 8%. You know, we look and we think, well, we've made a lot of headway. The answer is we have not. The glass ceiling is very much there.
Very there.
However, let's look at what that means and why companies are doing something about that. It's not because they think it's a good idea socially, even though it is. The data are so clear. Let me read you a few things. When there is a higher representation of women in C-suite positions, financial returns to investors are 34% greater.
And people always want to follow the money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Organizations with above average gender diversity and levels of employee engagement
Mm-hmm.
outperform those with lower diversity and engagement by over 8%. We all are struggling for engagement and so because we know engagement translates into money. So let's be real. This is a financial issue. Let's look at innovation, which is another aspect of making money, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Those with higher diversity numbers had 19% higher innovation revenues. I mean, come on. Now, McKinsey did a study, and those that are in the top quartile for racial and
Mm-hmm.
ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to surpass their peers in terms of competitive positioning. Gender diversity in the top quartile, 15% more competitive. We have more engaged, they're more innovative, and we make more money.
We make
And
more
we
money.
were and we return more money to our investors. The last thing is when we look at that two-dimensional aspect of diversity, inherent and acquired, 45% are more likely to capture larger portions of the market, and 70% are more likely to enter a new market within a 12 to 18 month period. Need I say more? Money, money,
No.
money.
No, and you make an excellent point there as it relates to, really if they go back and study, because some of these organizations, especially those that are not necessarily viewing the diversity as being an important subject matter for them to even take on. There's some organizations that will do some soft things like, oh, we're going to set up a committee to study diversity. And for them, that is taking actions. Now, I would love to hear from you because I know that you have worked with um, several international organizations in your consulting practice, and I'd love to hear from you this evening about some real life cases that you have observed where diversity and the inclusion and the equity organizations that have embraced that, how has that translated in real life results that you personally have observed in your time as a consultant?
Well, I must tell you that this is a topic that does make people a bit uncomfortable because even if they believe philosophically it's the right way to go, they don't necessarily know. And we need to encourage people to have candid conversations, those of us who seek greater representation,
Right. Mm-hmm.
whether it is women, whether it is people of color, whether it is people of different ethnicities or gender orientations. We need to encourage discussion because through discussion we will learn and
Yes.
we will find out. I really do believe that people of good hearts and minds can and do disagree, but if we learn together, then we will do better together. And so, on all sides, we need to make sure that we get very good and comfortable, that people will not always say the right things. But if we're talking about it, it's my hope and it's been my observation, we can do the right things. Early on in my career, when I worked at Intel, I was chartered to create a strategic plan for recruiting and retaining technical women and people of color. At the time, and this was back in 2000, so it's 21 years ago, we found that it has been a topic of great concern to many, many companies and in a meaningful way. But they didn't know what to do and they didn't know why they came, but they left.
Mm,
They came and they left. Why?
right.
Because it was inhospitable.
Yes.
And
Mm,
so it wasn't intentional, but for example, men would make the assumption that women couldn't travel because they had children. That limited their opportunities for growth. It limited their opportunities for contribution and for promotion. And so women reported they gave up after a while because
right.
why would they? Uh, this is again, when we had the candid discussions, men said, I thought I was being careful. I thought I was being sensitive to their obligations. And so women raised their hand and said, let me make that decision. And they go, oh, okay. So again, there was nothing really inherently driving these people from a negative perspective. They were trying to do
Mm-hmm.
the right thing, but making
Mm-hmm.
assumptions and assertions that were not valid. So back 21 years ago, that was the case. It was the attitude that drove men and women of color and women in particular out of the technical ranks. And guess what? It's still happening throughout STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I have devoted myself for the last 21 years to trying to correct that, to ensure that we make the environments welcoming and that
Mm-hmm.
we
Mm-hmm.
ensure that our students have the proper education and preparation to engage in whatever field in which they're interested. Making sure, for example, that they are not deterred or deferred from
Yes.
a career. One of my dear colleagues has a daughter who's 12 years old, and the students in this young lady's class were looking at what careers they might engage in. Her mother's an engineer, her father's an engineer. And so, guess what? She thinks engineering is a fine prospective
Yeah.
career for her. The
Mm-hmm.
teacher said to her, oh, you don't want to be an engineer. You really write very well. And it's true, she does. But should we deter her from looking at engineering?
No.
Of course not. Again, so wherever that deterrence comes from, we need to make sure that we're really
Combat it.
looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
For me, as I've traveled around the world with my work, one of the things that I have found, and I have had the benefit of a first class education, but through my travels, I have seen how people live differently, are educated, how they live, work, and breathe together and separately.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Mm-hmm.
has enriched my perspective to better
Right.
understand what
Mm-hmm.
I have come to believe. For example, my work in India, experiencing the amazing cultures, plural, that exist. We
Yes.
talk about India as if it is an entity. There are multiples of languages, of
Yes.
dialects, of
Mm-hmm.
cultures, of religions that are experienced. So you can say, oh, yes, I've experienced the culture of India. And right away, you're minimizing the uniqueness. You're using stereotypes to describe what is a vastly, vastly diverse experience. Dance, food, music, religion, sense of time. It's all perspective. For example, I attended a colleague's wedding, and the bride was Hindu and the groom Sikh. And they combined these two ceremonies so artfully. I had never
Mm.
been to either wedding. And yet, as I sat through the Sikh experience, and I didn't speak the language, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
observing very carefully, doing what everybody else is doing, I was raised Roman Catholic. They had a sharing of bread, very
Mm-hmm.
similar to my
To
Catholic
what? Mm-hmm.
communion. They
Mm-hmm.
extended signs of peace to one another, a very important part of the liturgy in the Catholic Church. There was a sense of demonstration of peace amongst the gatherers and even a call to prayer that I, as someone who didn't speak the language, didn't know the structure of their religious adherence and observation. I could observe what that meant for them. Later
Mm-hmm.
on, as I'm talking to my colleagues and the bride and groom, learning about their culture was amazing and enriched me in ways that I could never have experienced reading a book, watching a TV program, or even studying. It really was an immersion that forever I am thankful. And that's just one example of
Right.
what a diverse experience can really provide.
I appreciate what you're saying because it's so easy to zone in and zero in on the differences. But as humanity, there are so many things that binds us together. There's so many great things that bind us together. Yesterday I was watching this video my daughter was showing me with a group of celebrities from different backgrounds, different races coming together for a common cause to raise money for Haiti. That We Are the World retake that.
Oh, yes.
You know which one I'm talking.
I
So it
do.
was
I do.
it was something. It just gave me a very warm feeling on the inside as I sat back and watch how we can come together on such, especially around a common good. And I
Yes.
believe around the issue of diversity is something that I agree with you 100%, that organizations, those who are in positions to hire, to make hiring decisions, they're the ones who can make a huge and significant mark where this is concerned. But I want to segue into another aspect of this discussion. Jeanette,
Sure.
I do a lot of diversity trainings, but my trainings are primarily centered around unconscious bias. And I have this particular workshop that I do called Mind Your Blind Spot. There is never
Mm.
a discussion about diversity that can, veer far away from the subject matter of our implicit biases and some of the assumptions that we make, especially as we make hiring decisions about individuals. How can one best manage this within the organizational realm to ensure that it's being limited as much as possible? I know that what you and I do from a human capital perspective, we try to help organizations with that. But give us a step-by-step approach in terms of how organizations can limit the impact of implicit biases on our decision making within the organization.
Well, first of all, we all need to accept and appreciate that we are born and raised with implicit bias. What is an implicit bias? It really is an attitude or understanding, action, decision that is made in an unconscious manner. We aren't aware of them. Unconscious bias refers to prejudice that we're completely unaware of, and they are automatic. They are triggered by our brain when we make quick decisions. I was teaching a group of mental health providers. These were physicians, they were psychiatrists, they were psychologists, they were counselors. And I asked them if any of them could think of an example in the prior week where they had been confronted by unconscious bias. And so the room gets very quiet and they're working at their tables and they're chatting. And in the back of the room, this woman jumps up and screams, Ford. And, I looked, she's an MD. And I said, Doctor, would you like to share something with the group? And she said, You bet. She said, I was raised in Iowa. She said, my dad was a corn farmer. And she said, we were a Ford family. She said there were two kinds of families in, where I grew up. We were Ford and we were one of those, or all the others, Chevy, Dodge, whatever. And she said none of our cars were Fords. She said, last weekend, my husband and I, our car died. And she said, we'd been fooling around with replacing it for years. And so we said, okay, let's go out and see what's out there. We hadn't looked at all the vehicles, and they were going to look at electric vehicles. They were going to look at, the combined electric and gas powered. And so that was their weekend fun. Well, so her husband made a list of all the things that they talked about, what they wanted. And so he said he put together, based on geography, where they were going to go and look at these different vehicles. Well, the first dealership that he goes to turn into is Chevy. And she says, stop. And he said, what's the matter? And she said, we can't go in there. And he looked at her and said, why? And she said, we only drive Fords. And she said, and the whole class started to Twitter and she said, I physically started to get sick to my stomach, thinking that I was not going to be a Ford family. And she said, I laughed about it afterwards, but I really had to think how really inconsequential. Now, Ford, Chevy, GM, whatever, Chrysler, Dodge wouldn't think that's so inconsequential. But if you think about inherent bias, even to the fact that the going to a Ford or Chevy dealership really brings about physiological reaction on the part of unconscious bias.
Mm.
It's the things we know and don't even think about.
Yeah, as an excellent point. I normally use the story of the daughter-in-law that was cutting the ham on both sides, and her husband was like, "Why do you always do that? I noticed that every time you were making this ham, you cut off half at a quarter at the top and a quarter. It's like you're wasting half of this ham. I really need to know why you keep doing that." And she was like, "I really don't know. My mother always does this." And so he picked up the phone and he called his mother-in-law, was like, "Listen, Mom, I need you to tell me something. Why is it that every time Sharon goes into the kitchen to make ham, she cuts off a quarter of the ham in the front and a quarter of the ham in the back?" And Mom was like, "You know what? I really don't know. She probably saw me doing that, but I saw my mom doing it, and that's why I did it." Fortunately, the wife's grandmother was still alive, and so the husband was really persistent about finding out what was the rationale behind, cutting a quarter of that ham in the front and a quarter of that ham in the back. And
Oh,
when he contacted grandma, you know what happened? He found out that grandma only cut the ham that way because her pan was not big enough to hold the entire thing. So for years upon years, one particular behavior or action has been transferred from one generation to the next, all because people just did not question, the why behind certain things that are happening. And I think that's a very important and pivotal point that you make, Jeanette, when you talk about don't just go along because you have inherited certain tendencies. It's okay for you to question it, to see why is it that I always choose to do this, and challenge that sometimes, as an organization. And that's what it calls for. If you're looking at your employment for the past year, look over your numbers, look at the ethnicities of those you've hired, and do some retrospection. How well have you been doing in the area of making sure that you at least hire people who may not necessarily look like you, who may not necessarily sound like you, they may
mhm.
not necessarily think like you, but they do have value that they could bring. So that's
I,
that's that's an excellent point. Yes.
There are two
Mm-hmm.
things I'd like to say on that point. One is for your listeners. Dr. Adam Grant has a new book out, Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. And he challenges us to listen and to learn from those who we disagree with. He has studied um, people's perceptions on getting others to come along, and and the past 5 years, our political environment has really amped
Mm-hmm.
disagreements to the point where families don't talk to one another if they're on opposite sides of the political spectrum. And so this is a great read. Dr. Grant always, it's well worth everyone's time. And
Thank you.
absolutely think that. And the other thing that I would offer, and you mentioned hiring and challenging ourselves to look at the success of hiring. The Leadership IQ company just released a study a couple months ago. And let me read to you the first line of that study. According to our research, 46% of newly hired employees will fail within 18 months, while only 19% will achieve unequivocal success.
Wow.
That we're not doing so
That's
great.
staggering.
We're not doing great hiring. And again, we have always tended to hire who we look and sound like. Now, it may be your perspective. I joke about, I am, a Trojan through and through as a graduate of the University of Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
However, I don't discount the value of education, even from our crosstown rival at UCLA. So
Yes.
it really is important that we understand that we have always looked. How do we do that? We go to our alumni association, we go to our church, we go to our friends. We look within our own lives to find other employees, and that's why we hire who we look like. And guess what? It's not working.
It's not working. It's not
It's
working.
not.
That's an excellent point, and the data supports what you're saying. One of the things that we do and we offer to our clients at Pottingers and Associates Consulting, and I'm not sure if you're also on board with that, but psychometric testing through behavioral assessments and cognitive assessments. They're one tool. There are different tools that you can use to help with that process. But what are your views on that in incorporating objective assessment tools or scientific based assessment tools in the hiring process? How do you think that helps in limiting unconscious bias and other factors that play into the lack of diversity in the workplace?
It's interesting. I just had this discussion with my class at the University of Houston, and we were just discussing the use of psychometrics in the workplace. Well, first, let's define what a psychometric test is. And according to the U.S. National Council on Measurement in Education, psychometrics refers to psychological measurement. So when would you use a psychometric test? In the workplace, we test candidates or evaluate candidates for a job. Psychometric instruments can measure skills and experience and knowledge, ability, personality traits, attitudes, and job or even academic potential. Now, I have seen examples of recruiting, promotion, employee career ladder direction and alignment, all using psychometric instrumentation. Such instruments afford us the opportunity to learn more about candidates quickly and in theoretically an unbiased manner. However, the key is that you have to test, the test needs to be valid, meaning that the test actually tests and measures and has proof of what it asserts it will measure. There are thousands of instruments out there, but very few of them have validity data that will support their use in the hiring process.
Right.
It also needs to be reliable, meaning that if you take it more than once over a period of time, that you'll roughly get the same answer or score, assuming not, if someone takes the SAT or the ACT and they haven't had trigonometry, they will get a score. The test could still be considered reliable if they take it in 6 months and they've had trigonometry and then score higher in that particular area. So that's the key point. But remember that the test needs to measure what it purports, and they need to have data to do that. There are skill tests like the ACT's work keys, which test things like applied mathematics and graphic literacy, business writing, or applied technology. There are behavioral assessments like the one that you and I use, which is predictive index. And that looks at how people appear in the workplace. There are personality tests, and I hold my hand up here and say, these are not to be used for hiring, because personality tests attempt to identify a person's personality. So either a skill test or a behavioral assessment has relevance and has meaning. A personality test cannot be proven valid or reliable in the work environment relative to effectively helping to discern one candidate's capabilities over another's.
Doing a job.
So once you've identified the appropriate assessment, employers can expect that an assessment you can help get to know candidates faster and with a degree of greater accuracy. It can buffer your process from inherent personal bias, which we know we all have. It can generate questions for the interview team to ask of the candidates. Example for a finance job. You want somebody who's detail oriented and has a lot of patience. And if you see that they're behavior is such that they are not data intensive or don't use data to make decisions, and they're not detail oriented, doesn't mean you discount them. It means you ask the question about how they do a job, knowing that their
Yes.
behavioral profile
Yes.
is how do you do that,
Mm-hmm.
the job that needs that when you're not that. And you'll be interested to find that people adapt. And that's
They do.
why
Mm-hmm.
it helps you ask good questions. It also helps both the candidate and the hiring company to align on the 4 factors that we know go into the success of a job. It's the
Mm-hmm.
company culture, it's the team culture, it's the hiring
Yes.
manager's managerial style, and the job.
The job.
So that
Mm-hmm.
is the job what the candidate thinks it is. We
Right.
call a job administrative assistant, and from every company I've ever worked for and with, it's something different, and you need to understand that. And
Right.
so that's why the assessments can help you align on those 4 factors. And finally, it helps you build data on successful candidates. But remember
Yes.
that
Mm-hmm.
just because you find strengths does not mean that strengths taken to extremes don't become weaknesses. So I urge caution, caution. And guess what? Assessments are not for amateurs. Make sure that you appreciate that psychometrics is a science, it requires knowledge and studies, and is ever evolving. These employment related tests are not to be picked out of the air. They need to make sure that they align with the company and how you view the importance of hiring. You need to watch out for what we in HR in human capital called adverse impact. Those are practices that adversely impact one group of people more than another, even
Mm-hmm.
though
Mm-hmm.
it appears on the outside that it is formally neutral. And then finally, make sure you're using the instrument for its original purpose, i.e., specifically what it was created to measure.
That's an important point because it's interesting when we work with clients, some of them ask us, can you do this test on my wife, because I think that this could help us to better understand each other. And I make sure I put that disclaimer: we're not marriage counselors, so we can't help you with that. But those are very powerful points that you make, Jeanette, about how to use uh assessment tools responsibly, because that's a very important aspect of the hiring process. Jeanette, we're coming up towards the end of the show, and it's usually this time that we take questions from the audience. And so I'm going to go ahead and see if we have any questions here for you. Let's see. I see one here. Um, Challenge yourself and your hypothesis and shift if you must. Oh, that's the point. So yeah, so that's basically, we need that's a comment right there that he was making about challenging your hiring yourself, especially as it relates to your hiring process. I have one last question for you, and then we're going to close out. Jeanette, the question is simply this: how has failure shaped you?
When you asked me that question in our prep session, I thought about that and long and hard. And the thing that struck me, it's that's so unfortunate that the word has such a negative connotation. The
Mm,
the definition of failure is lack of success, right? And frankly, there could be nothing further from the truth. Robert Schuller, the late Christian evangelist, thought on failure, just to me, is absolutely ideal. He says, failure doesn't mean you're a failure, it just means you haven't succeeded yet. And for me, failure helps me learn. I learn every day through what I've either done wrong or haven't done because I didn't know to do it. Failure helps me grow. Mm. And failure has allowed me to remain grateful. Grateful
yes.
for all of the things, the people, the organizations, the experiences, the connections, and even the inability to succeed yet, because it spurs me on. Now, think about it. If Do you ever think that Serena Williams as a young tennis player, do you think she thought of herself as a failure as a young competitor? No, when she lost, that just had her back on the tennis court, practicing and
Practicing.
exercise and better
Mm-hmm.
building her skills. So, of course not. It spurred her on to learn and to understand how her competitors succeeded against her. So, I'm not saying that failure is comfortable, it's pleasant, or that I wouldn't prefer to win, but failure is a fact of life. Make it bend
Mm-hmm.
to help you, however or wherever it may appear.
Excellent, excellent. I'm actually a student of leadership, and I always enjoy hearing, different leadership veterans like yourself, articulate and pontificate around this particular subject matter of failure. And I really appreciate your perspective. John Maxwell says that you should embrace failure because failure is your friend. If you come across something and you failed at it, just do the studies and see what is it that you didn't do this time around and go back and make it better. So that's an excellent point, Jeanette. One last one for you. This one is for me more so than it is for our audience. What are you reading now, Jeanette? What are you reading currently that we could benefit from?
Well, I shared with you the book Think Again from Dr. Adam Grant, and it's a great read, and I highly recommend it. But I've got 3 books on my nightstand that I'm going through, and each of them keeps me up way late at night. One of them is Emotional Agility by Susan David, an excellent book on emotions. Culture Renovation by Kevin Oakes. And I must admit, I am a real devotee and friend of Kevin's. He is the CEO and co-founder of I4CP, a noted and highly regarded HR research organization. But he
Got
has
you.
written a spectacular book on culture renovation. And then finally, the third book is one I'm just about done with. I'll finish it tonight, called Humanocracy by Gary Hamel and Michel Zanini. And it is talking about moving organizations to humanocracy from bureaucracy or any of the other styles of leadership, because it creates humans as amazing as the people inside them.
Mm.
Isn't that a great title? So
I love it.
all 3 books I highly recommend. Highly recommend.
Thank you very much. I'll definitely look into them. I'm going to go back and watch the replay so I can make sure I have those jotted down. We are at the end of the program, and I just want to take this time to just pause and say thank you, Jeanette, for spending the past 50 minutes with me. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I've learned a lot from this discussion, and I really hope that our viewing audience did as well. We're going to invite those who are watching online, wherever you are, to make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Jeanette, if someone on here would like to get in contact with you to benefit from your services, how can they reach you?
There's the 2 easiest ways are this. The first one is LinkedIn, and I use my full name, Jeanette K. Winters. My hair's a lot shorter in the picture. This is COVID hair, but you'll recognize me. So LinkedIn is the very easiest, obvious way. The second way is through our website, which is Parish Partners, and that is PARRISH Partners, all one word.com. And you'll find a description of our services, our programs, and a little bit more about my background, as well as my colleagues. So, folks, I just so appreciate the time to spend with all of you. It is an honor. And Shauna Kay, as always, you do such a service for me and for all the people in your environment by holding these great conversations. They're important. What you do matters. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And I look forward to COVID being over so we can spend some time when you could fly over here in nice, warm Florida, and we could spend some time having dinner or something. But Jeanette, thank you very much for joining us. And we want to say to our viewing audience, right now, Pottingers and Associates, we're offering some free behavioral assessment for those of you who are joining us. You can go onto our website at www.pottingersandassociates.com. go ahead on that page and just do that free behavioral assessment and respond to our request for a one-on-one readback session. I promise you, your life will never be the same. Thank you so much for joining us, and may God bless you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Strategic Alignment Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to our podcast by visiting our website at www.pottingerandassociatesconsulting.com.